Hello everyone, hi! This is the 27th time that I'm setting up the camera in a different spot, so we're just gonna roll with it. Welcome to this casual, chatty video all about my stay here in Paris and what it's like to study literature here. I have been here for a bit more than 3 months at this point, I think. And I feel like I'm starting to pick up on some of the cultural and academic nuances. So I'm going to talk about all that today, and I've also asked you on the community page if you had any specific questions. So I'm going to get into my progress when speaking French, any tips on that, how I deal with loneliness when living abroad, money, how I got my apartment, and lots more. If I'm not answering your question in this video, then it's probably because I've either already talked about it in one of my 2 previous Q&As. I'll link those in the description box down below, or because your question had nothing to do with my stay here in Paris, or because I just don't feel ready to speak on the topic yet. I know there was one question about how my stay here has impacted my reading preferences. I feel like I still need a bit of time to let that sink in before I can speak on that. One last thing before we get into it. I feel like this goes without saying, but I'm just one person and I haven't been here for very long, and I'm prone to see patterns where there aren't any. So everything I say, take it with that grain of salt. Let's get into the video now. The first question, the Grim Reader, I love that name, asked, I'd be interested in the cultural differences you have noticed between France and Austria. The little things you really only notice when you actually live somewhere, but not as a tourist. Okay, interesting. I have written down some examples of that. So the first one I noticed really early on is how relaxed people are in the supermarket here. So I'm kind of used to, in Austria, when I'm standing in line for checkout, to be really rushing. It's like, the cashier is pulling over all the groceries and I'm getting them into my backpack as quickly as possible because, how dare you take up 3 seconds of someone else's life. But then when I came here to France, I was like standing in the checkout line. The cashiers were chill. They were scanning some products and they were like taking a little break, talking to the person. And I don't know, there were all these breaks. And that is so lovely. And I've sworn to myself that I'm gonna take that habit with me wherever I go. I'm never ever gonna stress in a checkout line ever again, because it just doesn't make any sense. It really makes no difference in the grand scheme of things, and it just makes the experience of buying groceries so much more relaxing. The other thing I'm noticing is that it seems that culture just is a little bit more important to people here. I don't know exactly how to express it, but for example, in the metro there's all these advertisements, right? And they're not just for products, for like beauty products or food. They're also a lot about different museums, books that have just come out, theater plays, musicals, operas you can go see. And I feel like I see a lot less of that in Austria. And somehow it just seems like being cultured is cool. I think my French teacher once said that even politicians in France, when they're like citing works of literature, that's a good thing. It's like well perceived to be well read. In Austria, people would look at you a little bit weirdly, like you're trying to be better than someone else or something. I just even feel like my university is such an example for that. The university I study in is just a university of cultures. So you can study cinema, literature, languages, cultural studies, all that there, and it's a university just for that, and it's huge. The campus is humongous. There's so many students there. Whereas in Austria, my university in Vienna, we're like a tiny little department stuffed in the back of the drawer. It feels like, kind of paling in comparison to the bigger branches of studies. Like there's no separate university for cultural studies. It's really cool. I truly feel like at the university I'm studying at right now, I'm like in the artsy school I always meant to be at or something. Like there's pianos everywhere, there's a theater in the basement, there's a cinema in the basement. There's just so much art happening all the time wherever you look. It's a great experience. And sort of in the same vein, but a little bit of a different point, is that it just seems like people here are proud of their culture and their language and their literature. Maybe that's just like the groups of people I surround myself with, but I feel like in Austria it would be very weird to be proud of your country. Like just historically we've done such horrible things that, you know, you don't want to be caught dead being proud to be an Austrian or being proud of the language, I feel like. The fourth difference I've noticed, again, everything's kind of in the same vein. I feel like French people are a lot quicker to stand up for themselves, right? I mean, they have that reputation of doing that, but it's kind of refreshing. You know, for me, I think I have the opposite tendency. I really hold back in a lot of situations, and to just have that, what is that, Selbstverständnis, that you are entitled to your opinion, that you are entitled to your time, you know, like in the supermarket. Of course, that also has its downside, right? But to me, it's kind of refreshing. I'll give you an example. So, a couple of weeks ago, I felt really down. I kind of fell into a hole after the presidential elections in the US. It kind of took me by surprise how much it affected me. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to talk about it on the channel, because, you know, it's not a political channel, and I was just kind of going back and forth. And then I talked to my friend Anna. She's a Parisian, and she was so lovely. She just said to me, Maria, you know, just know that this is your channel and you can say on there whatever it is that you want to say. And I was like, thank you. You're right, you know. But it's that kind of peace, I guess, that just strikes me really different from the norm. And the last point of difference I really noticed is that I feel like living in Paris, you can totally forget the rest of the world. Like, to me, it almost seems like it doesn't exist, in the sense that the French culture and language is just so rich, and you don't need to speak English. You know, Paris has everything you could want, and it just seems like a world of its own. It seems like even the rest of France doesn't exist. Whereas I think in Austria, I'm very aware of the fact that we're a tiny little country that is super dependent on everything that is around us, right? I think we have like 9 neighboring countries or something, and they're also so close, you're like constantly confronted with that in a way. Whereas here, I don't know, again, the only way I can describe it is that it feels like a completely separate place in a way. Okay, the next question is, are your courses in French? Yes, my courses are in French. I mean, 8 of the 9 courses I'm taking are in French. The only one that is in English is the one that is called Paris in French Cinema. It's about the history of French cinema, more or less. If you want to know more about my courses, I've made an entire video about that. I'll link it up in the cards. Okay, next question. Hi, love your videos. I got a silly question. What's your favorite French pastry? And did you find some nice bakery in Paris? I think that is a great question. I have to say, what I love getting the most at bakeries here is just a baguette tradition. And then I eat it with salted butter. And it's the greatest thing ever. I honestly prefer it over all the sweet stuff. Like, just, I don't know, man, there's just nothing compared to a baguette, a French baguette. Like, it's so crunchy and so fluffy and so soft and so tasty, and it's just everything. I love that. And if I go sweet, I'd usually just get a crepe right away. Like there's this creperie right in front of university, and the other day I got myself a crepe with Kinder chocolate in there. It's like so indulgent. Absolutely love it. And I mean, of course, you know, croissants and pain au chocolat and everything tastes great. It's amazing, but I would say those two are my favorites. What's great about Paris with bakeries, I feel like, is that you can walk into any bakery and everything's great everywhere. I absolutely love the one that is down the street from me. I'm not gonna tell you where it is because I don't want people knowing exactly where I live, but very lucky. I'm very happily taking that stroll in the morning to get myself a fresh baguette. But then there's also, close to République, I think, the Boulangerie Utopie, which I went to because I heard that they have won the presidential baguette making contest this year, and I tried some of their stuff out and it was amazing. So apparently every year there's a contest of which bakery makes the best baguettes, and then the one that wins gets to deliver a baguette to Emmanuel Macron every Sunday for an entire year. So I thought I have to try the presidential baguette, and it was great. And it's an experience. I stood in line for like half an hour, but everything there looked absolutely delicious and tasted delicious, so I think they won for a reason. Okay, Franny asked, is Paris overrated? I would say no. I haven't lived here long enough, but I think it's amazing, and even though I'm not a person who would ever want to live in a city permanently, if I would live in a city, I would want to live in Paris. I talked to someone the other day on the street, and she said she's from Russia and she moved here when she was like 19, thinking that she's going to explore the entire world and move on quickly. And now it's 20 years later and she never moved on. And she said that everyone who comes to Paris somehow loves it in a way where they're trying to make it work somehow to stay here, right? They'll take waiter jobs or whatever it takes to be able to stay here, and I understand. In a way, I really understand. But you know, what do I know? As I said, I probably haven't been here long enough, and I haven't lived in really any big cities, so... Okay, next question. Where are you studying literature? So I study at the Université 3 Sorbonne Nouvelle, and all my courses are at the Nation campus. Okay, next question. Absolutely love your videos. The question I have is, was it difficult to settle down in Paris? And how do you think the way literature is taught in France shaped you? Is there any difference than what is taught in the other parts of the world? And I would also love to see a video on Albert Camus and your takes on his philosophy and works since you're in Paris. Hey, keep up the good work. Sending loads of love. Thank you so much. What a kind comment. Okay, so first of all, I do absolutely plan on making a video about Albert Camus, but it will probably have to be in the new year. I had the privilege to have quite some lessons in my philosophy course about him, so yeah, lots to say there. The settling down question I'll answer a little bit later, because there's one about dealing with loneliness that is kind of in the same vein. And then when it comes to studying literature, yeah, very interesting. So I've definitely noticed some differences. I would say the biggest one I'm noticing is, and I can only compare it to Austria, right? I'm literally comparing studying comparative literature in Vienna to studying comparative literature in Paris at those two specific universities. So again, take it with a grain of salt, but the studies seem to me to be a lot more philosophical here in France. It's like, you know how literature and philosophy used to be the same thing up until like a couple hundred years ago or something? I feel like you still really notice that here in France, and you notice it not so much anymore in Austria. So there's much more allowance for philosophical questions to arise and to be talked through in class. Whereas in Vienna, because the studies are called Literaturwissenschaften, right, literary science, which is like, I don't know, a bit weird, but often professors will just kind of cut topics short if they feel like it's going into too much speculative philosophical moments. The next thing I've noticed that is very different to my studies in Austria is that there's a real emphasis here in Paris on presenting in front of the class. I think I've mentioned that in another video, but in my semester here I'm gonna have to do 8 exposés, they're called, in front of the class, right, where I'm presenting a topic, a book I've read, I'm analyzing something, and I'm talking about it in front of the class. In my entire first year in Vienna, I've had to do that once, right, so it's 8 in one semester versus 1 in an entire year, which is again something I actually love. I really enjoy presenting in front of the class. I much prefer it over writing a thesis or something. So I'm happy. I mean, it's a lot. You know, that it basically means that I have a presentation almost every week. I love that. I think it's great for my ability to learn French. I really... yeah, again, I enjoy it, but I can imagine some people don't. Like, I know so many students that absolutely hate presenting in front of the class. It makes them really nervous and they'd much rather do scientific research or something. Another thing I'm noticing that's great is that in a lot of my courses here in France, the teachers actually ask us how we want to be evaluated, and we're like coming up with the exam and the exam questions ourselves, which is just so refreshing. You know, I had one course and the professor was like, look, I know we're gonna have to do the whole evaluation things and you have to get grades and it's very annoying for all of us, but what do you think is a fair way to do it? What would you like to do? You know, would you like to write something? Whatever. And we talked about it in class, and I don't know, that is just fantastic. Like, people are different learners, right? So just the fact that there is space for that is absolutely wonderful. Also with the exposés, the presentations I've talked about before, I could choose the topics I wanted to speak on in all of the 8 exposés. Like, there was not one where the professor told me which book to read or which topic to analyze. And that is not the case in Austria. You know, famously, last semester I've had to write this paper on Thomas Bernhard and it just didn't interest me. I don't like it. And of course there's something to be said that you can also learn a lot in situations where you don't get to choose. But I've just felt like this immense passion swelling up over the past months since I've been here, just because I could choose every topic I speak on, and I've loved those presentations. I felt so in my element. I'm in the flow. Then in terms of reading, I noticed that we're reading a lot more together in class here in France. So often the professor will give out different texts, and we will read them out loud in class together. I think that's a very beautiful thing to do, actually, to read out loud for one another. I really enjoyed when everything is silent and then one person reads out loud. You really practice your reading like that as well. Whereas in Austria, it's much more often the case that you just have to read things at home by yourself and then come back prepared. Another huge difference, and as I'm speaking about all this, I'm noticing how amazing it sounds to study literature in France, and I should never leave. But so the last thing I noticed is that students here are actually encouraged to bring their own writing, and talking through what students have written is actually part of the class a lot of the time. That would never happen in Austria, right? It's a very clear line between studying literature and studying to be a writer. Like, studying to be a writer is not part of the curriculum, and that was made very clear from the beginning, right? So don't do these studies expecting to even touch on how to improve your own writing or something. Whereas in France, I've had it in several courses now that the teacher said, hey, send me your texts if you want to. I'm going to print them out. We'll talk about them in class, you know? Or who wants to do a little presentation on a personal project or something they're writing on themselves, a personal reflection. There will be authors invited that then comment on what the students have written, and it's just like across the board lovely. It's so amazing how they're able to just soften the edges of what it means to study literature a bit more over here. I think it's a really good way to sum it up, actually. And it feels so relaxing. And maybe that also goes into the question you had about how it shaped me to study literature here. Is I think it just gave me confidence in a way in myself. Like, it gave me confidence in the fact that the way I approach literature, which is very much softening the edges around everything, right? And letting life experience inform my reading and pulling from all kinds of different fields to enrich my reading, etc., etc. Like, it gave me confidence to do that, and to see that happening even in an academic setting is just something very relaxing, and it makes me very happy. And the fact that I always get to choose my own topics really helps me to find my own style in a way. And I've done one presentation in front of the class specifically. It's the one on Kafka, which I basically translated and then uploaded to my YouTube channel, so you can check it out. So one of my presentations was basically that video, but in French. And the teacher said afterwards that it was so unusual, like no one in France would ever do a presentation like that. I don't know why he said that. He said it was really out there in a way, but he loved it and he thought it was great and he learned something from it. And I don't know, all these experiences are, again, essentially just making me more confident in my approach. And that's really something I'm so grateful for. You know, as much as it is lovely to live in a big city and to enjoy my time here, I'm here to study literature, right? That's like my number one priority. And to be able to take that sentiment with me is just, I feel like, gonna strengthen me for the rest of my life, honestly. Vera Nota asked, have you noticed any differences in the way literature is taught in France? I already answered that. After having spent some time in Paris, do you think the stereotype of Paris and France in general being the capital of literature and culture is accurate? And finally, do you ever doubt the value of literary studies, especially coming from a field which has very real, visible benefits and the direct impact on improving the lives of other people? Okay, so to your question about the stereotype of Paris and France being the capital of literature and culture in general, I mean, I feel really ill-equipped to answer that question. What I will say is what I've already sort of alluded to in the first question. Just seems like literature and culture is more, it's higher up in the priority list of people's lives than it would be probably in Austria. But again, that's like really broad strokes, and I feel a little bit uncomfortable even commenting on that, because something being the capital of literature implies that other places are not, and that there's a sort of hierarchy that is definitely real and that has to do with all kinds of inequalities that are extremely complex and I don't fully comprehend. I don't know, I don't want to hype it up more than it is already, but I do definitely notice, again, that literature and culture just seem to have a right to exist here a lot more than anywhere else, I have noticed. Okay, and then to your question, do you ever doubt the value of literary studies, especially coming from a field which has very real, visible benefits and the direct impact on improving the lives of other people? No. Okay, wow. That has gone really, really dark. Next question. Jenny Ye asked, why did you decide to study abroad in one of your secondary spoken languages? Do you ever struggle to understand the works when written in French? So I wanted to study in French specifically because I wanted to get better at speaking French. And I really love the additional challenge of having to figure out a language, like being forced to figure it out. I feel like that's the only real way to learn a language, you know. It can't be too comfortable. And do I struggle with works when written in French? Yes, absolutely, all the time. It's like when a professor is giving out a text and, you know, he says, scan it and tell me what it's about. I'm like, absolute disaster, red alert, red alert. There's so much I don't understand. It's really difficult, and it takes me a ton of focus and often looking up words to be able to fight my way through. But I already notice how I'm getting a lot better at it, so that's really motivating, and that's like the thing that keeps me going. The next question is, would you ever want to live in Paris longer? Yes, I think I would love to be here for a year or two. Honestly, I'm not a person who's going to live in the city forever. I think I definitely, you know, I want to be on the countryside, and I think on the long term I'm not sure I would ever leave Austria just because I'm so rooted there. If I would, then probably only to move to a Scandinavian country, to be honest. Sorry, there were like 1,000 kids crossing the scene. Anyways, I don't know where I was. Yeah, I think living here for a couple of years would be perfect. Honestly, there's so much to see and so much culture to indulge in, so much food to indulge in. I'm just not a person that wants to live in a city forever. But as I said before, if a city, then it will probably be Paris, from what I can say now. Okay, next question. What's your favorite and last favorite thing about living in Paris and your study abroad program? So I would say my favorite thing about living in Paris is the food and the emphasis on culture and literature that I've touched on. And the bookshops are just incredible. There are so many of them. And then my favorite thing about my study abroad program is definitely my French philosophy course. I just have a professor that is top-notch in what he does. He's so good at explaining philosophy to us in simple terms, and I am enjoying the heck out of that course. It's absolutely perfect. And then my least favorite thing, I think, about living in Paris is that people just start speaking English to me when they notice that I'm not French. So my French obviously isn't at a level where, you know, I speak accent free or anything. So as soon as people see me struggle a little bit, they just switch to English, and I'm like, no, you're taking away the opportunity for me to learn, and I really don't like that. I keep speaking French then, and they keep speaking English, and yeah, I don't know why that is. Maybe they feel like I'm insulting their beautiful language by, you know, not speaking it perfectly, but I just don't like it, you know. You're taking away the opportunity actually for me to get better by doing that. And then my least favorite thing about my study abroad program, I don't know, nothing much. I think the fact that the semester is so short just makes it unnecessarily hectic. That's it. Thank you for the question. Okay, Scoop Sabouk asked, as someone who has studied abroad and felt quite lonely, I was wondering if you had similar experiences, and if so, how you dealt with it. Okay, yeah, I think, so the answer is twofold. The first part of my answer is that I am a naturally very introverted person, so my desire for interaction with other people is incredibly low. Like if I, for example, go and have a cup of tea with someone for a couple of hours on a Saturday, I probably don't want to see anyone on Sunday. and on Monday and on Tuesday. So I'm more than happy to just have a social interaction once a week or something. And then on top of that, I'm just also very excited about studying, right? I have a lot to do for uni. That's like one of the other differences I'm noticing. Like compared to Austria, I have a lot more to do. Like I have more courses for which I get less credits, and I'm busy, hence the sporadic uploading lately. So that, together with the fact that I'm really excited about all the topics that I can choose myself, I'm just really excited to to study and to stay home and work on my presentations. I don't know. I've heard that word the other day. What was it, like JOMO, like joy of missing out? I have that. And I think I'm kind of used to being alone while studying anyways, right? It's not much different in Vienna. I think it just has to do with my age. I'm almost 30, so most of the people I study with are a good 10 years younger than me, and they're just in a different phase of life. I'm ready to settle down with a cat. So even though my colleagues can be lovely, it doesn't click in the same way. Now, on top of that, and this answer is very many layers, right? But I'm also only here for like 4 months, so I'm not die hard trying to find friends. I know I'm just gonna be gone again, and I have a handful of very lovely friends in Austria with whom I call regularly, and I don't know, it's just not my number one priority to build up an entirely different life here. I think I would feel different about it if I would be here for a year or two. That would definitely be a priority, but the way it is now, it's just not. Which doesn't mean that I haven't made friends. I've met 2 very lovely women that are also Erasmus students, and there are the 3 women from the meetup, which we're gonna go to the theater together one more time. We already went to see The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oh my gosh, loud kids everywhere. So there are some. I'm very easily satisfied with the social interactions I have. I don't know how else to say it. However, and that's the second fold of the twofold answer to your question, when I first lived abroad, when I first moved to Belgium when I was 19, I was very lonely, and it was really a big issue. I just couldn't seem to really make connections with people. I gained a lot of weight. Just everything was like the complete opposite of what I wanted it to be. I thought I'm gonna have this amazing time and, I don't know, build up this entirely different life, and then all I did was just like sit in my room, and I don't know, like it was really hard, a really dark time in my life actually, and I don't know what to tell you how to deal with it, because I dealt with it by eating a lot, and that's not a good idea. I think eventually I just sort of knew I had to do something. Like I really wasn't feeling well the way things were going, and I changed some things. I don't know, that would kind of would go into too much detail to say all that now, but I'm just trying to say I didn't force myself to stay in a situation that really didn't work for me and wasn't good for my mental and physical health. I think that's actually something really important to talk about, those, downsides of living abroad, or the loneliness that people can face, because I feel like living abroad and also traveling is just often seen as this universally net positive thing. It's cool, and you're getting all these experiences, and you're growing in all those ways, and yeah, that's true, but you're also making a lot of sacrifices. The first time I lived abroad, I missed the birth of my nephew, and I missed his first 5 birthday parties or something. I had to stop playing piano for 5 years, and I've never really gotten back into it the way I did before. I don't have friends from that time because I didn't really have roots anywhere, right? I had to build kind of everything back up when I moved home again, because eventually I was just fed up with this living abroad thing. So, you know, even though I do live abroad now, I know that I would never want this to be a lifestyle, and I like having roots somewhere. I guess when I have little moments of loneliness, the way I see it is that this might be the last time in my life where I have so few responsibilities, and in a way there's nothing that I enjoy more than walking through a city alone where I know no one knows me, right? Like I'm trying to savor these beautiful unknown moments and the growth that comes from it, because, you know, even though, for example, when I first moved to Belgium, that time was really, really hard, I can say now I've made it through that, right? I'm less afraid of being alone because I've made it through that already once in a really big way. Oh my god, I'm getting so cold. Read Red Official, hello, asked, are there any parts of Paris that particularly or unusually exceeded your expectations? Okay, so I'm pretty bad at geographics, so I'm not able to tell you which arrondissement I like most. But there are some places that have really surprised me. I really love hanging out at the République Square. There are a lot of nice little cafes and vintage stores there. The other thing that has really surprised me was the Père Lachaise cemetery. I just wouldn't have thought that a cemetery can be such a nice place to be at. Like, I've been there a few times already by now. If you don't know, it's a very well-known cemetery in Paris where a lot of famous French people are buried, amongst which Balzac, I think, Proust, I think Chopin is buried there, Oscar Wilde. It's one of my favorite places to take a walk in. It's just so serene and calm, and yeah, absolutely recommend that. If you ever come to Paris, you have to see that cemetery. And then there's like the Marais in the 4th arrondissement, which I initially thought I would stay away from because I heard that it's like the shopping mall, you know, the shopping district or something in the center. And I somehow thought that would be horrible because in Austria, like in Vienna, the 1st district is really, I think, a place you want to stay away from. Like, there's only huge shops, you know, Louis Vuitton and Cartier and I don't know what. And the people are insufferable, and it's only super rich people and only tourists, and it's like no one would ever want to go there. But here it's very different. Like, that's not the case for the Marais, I feel. I mean, there are a lot of shops, but there are a lot of small little independent shops that are actually not that expensive, right? Like jewelry stores, small little cafes. It's very cute, and it's all those small little streets. I don't know, it's a cozy time. And then the last place I unexpectedly really like is the place I live in, right? I don't technically live in the city of Paris. I live in the banlieue, close to Montreuil. And initially, when I knew I would move here, I thought, oh my gosh, it's gonna be, you know, really dirty or ugly, or I would feel unsafe, and it's not Paris. I don't know, like, I had all of these preconceived notions that turn out just not to be true. It's so beautiful here. Like, this is just one of the, I think, 3 huge parks that are right in front of my door. There's actually sheep here in this park. It's really cute. I'm on a little hill where I overview, like, I can see over the entirety of Paris. So yes, I'm not, you know, in the center, and I need to take the metro to get there, whatever, but it's somehow the best of both worlds. The TFC concept. Maria, I can't completely say how much I enjoy listening to your voice and learning from you. Thank you for the videos. Oh, so sweet. I have a question though. I was startled when you told me you currently speak 5 languages. That's astounding. I mean, how? I've been trying to learn French, but having a bumpy ride. Are there any tips? Thank you and sending love. Okay, so I think the whole topic of language learning kind of deserves its own topic. I mean, its own video. But here's 2 things that I will say. First, I think as soon as you have the bare basics of a language, like you obviously need to learn some basic grammar and vocabulary, but I think as soon as you have that, you have to get yourself in situations where you absolutely have to speak the language, and there's like no way around it. So whatever you do and however you create that situation, right? Maybe you have a pen pal or a friend who only speaks French, or you actually have the opportunity to come here. You just have to get uncomfortable, because I think language learning is often like very romanticized, and it's like cute to listen to a little podcast here or watch a movie there. But the thing is, you have to make these connections in your own head. Like, you cannot just passively consume. You have to be put into situations where you have to, with hand and feet, be able to express yourself. And that's, I feel like, the only way to actually get better at a language is to make that effort. And then the second thing is that I think with language learning there's a certain threshold that you can reach, and that if you're proficient to a certain level, your ability to speak the language actually won't go away anymore. So let me explain. I learned French when I was in school, right, when I was a teenager. But I'm pretty sure, I'm 100% sure, if I would have just stopped learning French and then I would have tried to speak it again after 10 years, I would have had to start from 0 again, because I was just never good enough for it to actually stick. But what I did after school is I spoke French for an entire year, and that means I was very good at it at some point. And now, even though I haven't spoken French in 10 years, I know that the language is dormant in me. I know it's asleep, I know it's there, and it can be very easily brought back to the surface. So I think, even though I cannot tell you exactly where that threshold is, if there is any way you can get yourself to that point, you're not gonna fall below a certain level anymore. And if you don't, then you kind of always have to start from 0 again. I don't know if that makes any sense. I think I have to structure my thoughts around that a bit more and maybe make a dedicated video about language learning. Okay, next question. What is the most surprising thing for you about French culture? I think the confidence I already mentioned, and the willingness to stand up for themselves. Okay, quick intermission. So sorry for the unexpected cut, but my SD card was completely full, and when I wanted to turn my camera back on after everything you just saw, I realized that it's already 5 o'clock. I had to pack my things and go to university. I got myself a hot drink because I was really cold from sitting at that lake for so many hours. And yeah, I went to uni, had my Dante course, printed some stuff. It was lovely. Now I'm back. I took a hot bath, and I'm going to continue answering the rest of the questions. It's funny, I'm feeling somehow particularly clumsy when it comes to filming videos lately. I'm like, I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, and I don't know, it's making me a little bit insecure. I don't know what's going on. But that's definitely one thing I'm looking forward to when I'm back home again, that I just have my usual filming spot, and I just know the drill, you know. Here I feel like I have to set everything up from scratch every time. Okay, I'll just continue with the questions. Next question is about how I got my apartment. Okay, so here's the thing. When I first knew that I'm gonna move to Paris, everyone told me, you know, it's gonna be really difficult to find an apartment, better start early, it's gonna be expensive, etc., etc. And I was like, yeah, sure, you know, how difficult can it really be? Well, turns out very difficult. So I cannot tell you how many messages I've sent on different platforms to try to get a room or an apartment, and no matter what I did, I sent messages in English, in French. I really tried my best. I just barely got any responses back. And it was discouraging me a lot. I really feared that I'm gonna end up without an apartment and that I'm not gonna be able to do my semester abroad because I don't have a place to stay. And as it got into summer and, you know, September was actually approaching, the time when I was gonna move here, and I still didn't have a place, I was starting to feel really desperate. I even made that video, right, on YouTube, asking you all if anyone had a tip on how to find an apartment or if anyone knows someone, and nothing came back. Like, a lot of people tried to help me, but it just didn't, you know, nothing worked out. And then I think it was at the end of July, I remembered that a couple of years ago I was at a seminar where I met someone who lived in Paris. And we didn't, you know, have that much to do with each other at the seminar, but we kind of talked enough to exchange numbers. So I thought, I'm just gonna call that person and ask him if he, by any chance, has a room or knows someone who has a room or an apartment to rent out. Now, he responded right away saying that the only person he knows is his ex, and she has an apartment that she usually rents out, but it would be really a coincidence if that apartment was, first of all, free right now, if, second of all, it was in the right place, you know, Paris is really big, and if, third of all, I could afford it. And I was like, please just send me her number. And I got in touch with her, and it was just the perfect apartment that she was renting out, and no one was in there at the moment. So immediately we really clicked. We called. She was happy that someone wants to rent it because she's gonna sell the place I think in 2025. And I was so happy to have found someone that I actually know via someone, right? Something that felt kind of safer than an apartment off some weird website with a person where I don't know whether I'm being scammed or not. The only issue was the price. I initially didn't want to spend more than ideally 600, 700 euros per month on a room or an apartment. I kind of upped that as time went along because I realized that it was going to be really hard to find something for that price. But now I'm paying 1,000 euros a month for this place that I'm staying at. And even though that's really expensive for me and kind of above budget and above what I hoped for, it was, first of all, the only option I had left. And second of all, it's just such a great place. It's perfect in every single way that I just felt like, you know, I can make it work, and it's probably worth it because in a couple of years I'm not going to think about that money anymore, those 200 euros extra. Because I've seen rooms being rented out, you know, where you share an apartment with 3 other people and you only have a tiny room. And that's already going for 700, 800 euros as well. So I don't know. I feel like the jump in price was not as high as the quality I ended up with. because everything about this apartment is great. Like, there's even a guitar in here. I have a couch, like a sleeping couch where people can sleep on. So my brother was able to visit me with his 2 children, right? There's 4 people that can sleep in this apartment. It's 3 kilometers from my university, which is perfect. And yeah, so that's how this situation came to be. I was very lucky. It was very last minute. And, you know, if someone tells you that it's hard to find something in Paris, believe them and look for something early on. Don't do what I did. Okay, the next question. Est-ce que la Sorbonne correspond à tes attentes? So basically, does my university live up to my expectations? I have to say, I didn't really have any expectations for the university specifically. I'm not very aware of, you know, how prestigious universities are. I didn't do a ton of research. There were 3 that I could choose from in Paris, and this one just seemed most likely to please me in terms of the courses and the just what the university offers overall. So I kind of went with my gut. I think more than expectations, I just had curiosities. The curiosity of what it was going to be like to study literature here and what they do differently. And I'm getting a good sense of that. I'm definitely not disappointed at all. I just also didn't have a lot of expectations. Okay, Ed Barrows asked, do you intend to learn other Romance language? What aspects of French do you prefer to German? So I think you mean other Roman languages. Yes, absolutely. I mean, in general, my heart is just torn between Germanic and Roman languages. I feel like I love them both equally at different times. I absolutely do want to learn other Roman languages. I'm most drawn to Italian at the moment. So I think if I would have the time, that's the first one I would choose. But I'm equally interested in learning Spanish, and Portuguese really intrigues me too. Even though I'm kind of afraid of Portuguese, I have to say, because whenever I hear Portuguese, I understand absolutely nothing. Whereas with Italian and Spanish, due to being able to speak French, I can decode, I would say, not most of it, but kind of a lot when hearing it spoken. Again, I love Germanic languages as well. I've thought about Norwegian the other day. I was like, oh, that long lost love of mine. So yeah, I think that's one of the curious things that happen when you speak a lot of languages. You just want to keep on learning more. It just never ends. What I like about French is that I actually have to use another part of my mouth to speak it. Sounds really weird, but speaking French is very much centered in the front of the mouth, and it feels different in my face to speak French. I'm explaining that quite terribly. But you know how usually English is very far, like back in the throat. Whereas French, you have to make different movements with your lips and your tongue and your mouth. And I love that about French, and it makes it so that I feel like overall I'm becoming more articulate because I'm using different muscles. But are there aspects that I prefer to German? I don't know, it's difficult to say. I think it's silly to say that one language is more beautiful than the other. You know, both French and German have such beautiful words, such beautiful works of literature and expressions, and I love them both equally. Another thing that I've alluded to before is that I love about French is that it just opens the door to all of the other Roman languages for me. So it has been really difficult to learn it, but now that I do, again, when someone speaks Italian, I've had this encounter with an Italian Erasmus student, and she just spoke Italian and I spoke French, and it worked perfectly fine. Like, we just understood each other, and that just feels like such a win. And the third thing I love about French is just how challenging it is. Again, it is the most difficult language I've ever learned, and it just keeps on challenging me. Even if I speak it really well, or I get to a point where I feel quite fluent, it's just so big and inexhaustible, and I love it for that. Okay, In Time asked, do you plan to stay in Paris after school is done, or do I want to? No, I'm going back home for Christmas already, actually. So the semester will be over then. I have all of my exams the 2 weeks before Christmas, and I'll be going home for Christmas. And as I said before, yes, I would love to spend a little bit more time here, but not permanently, I think. And then the last question is not really a question, it's just a comment I get a lot, and that is people asking themselves how I'm able to afford this. So I've talked about the fact that I get a stipend from the state of Austria before on the channel. It's called a self-supporting scholarship. That's not a very great translation, but it's called Selbsterhalterstipendium in German, and I think that's the best way to translate it. It's quite unique. From what I know, it only exists in this form in Austria, and it's honestly awesome. How it works is that if you're under 35 years old, which I am, and you don't have a university degree yet, which I don't have yet, and you have worked for at least 4 years, which I did, then you get the stipend. It's about 1,100 euros a month, and I won't ever have to pay that back. It's honestly great, and it's the thing that makes everything that I do possible. It makes such a big difference because this stipend allows me to focus on my studies full time, and I don't have the pressure of knowing that I'll have to pay that back one day. I get it for 7 semesters to finish my bachelor degree, so 3.5 years. And if I would want to do a master, I would get it for another 2.5 years. And if I would want to do a PhD, I would get it all throughout that time as well. The only condition is that I have to basically study full time if I want to make it through in these 3.5 years. So I can't really be lazy. So again, this stipend thing is really makes up the bulk of the money that I need every month just to be able to live and survive. It doesn't cover absolutely all of my expenses, but it covers most of them. And as I said, I have worked before I started studying, and I've saved up some money. And now I'm trying to get this YouTube channel to a point where I get some money in. So I don't know, it always somehow works out for the moment that I don't actually have to do any other work next to studying and making these videos. So I obviously get this stipend and the little bit of YouTube money also now that I'm here in France. In fact, there's top-ups from the stipend as well. So because I'm in France, I get a little bit more, and I also get a top-up from the Erasmus program. If you don't know, Erasmus is the program that makes it possible for people in universities in the European Union to do exchange semesters. So that's the program that is quote-unquote sending me, and they want to make it as easy and doable as possible for students to, live abroad. So there's all these like travel top-ups, and I also get a few €100 every month. It's like adapted to whichever country you go to. You get a bit of extra money because, usually it's just you have more expenses when you live abroad. So it's great. So all these little things and top-ups really help, and I'm usually quite smart with my money, and I save things for times when I don't get extra things. It just always kind of works out. Like, for example, now there is a stipend for well-performing students from the University of Vienna. If your grades are really good, you get like some kind of top up between like 700 and 1,500 euros per year or something. So I applied for that because my grades are good enough. There's also this CAF thing in France that supports people in what they have to pay for rent. And I feel incredibly lucky that the system is such where I live. And it also makes me a little bit uncomfortable from time to time because I get these comments, and I read from you every day, right? I get comments and emails of people saying they would love to study literature, for example, but they don't know how to afford it. And I'm just very aware of my privilege when it comes to that. So it makes me a little bit uncomfortable in my situation. I want to be transparent and normalize talking about money, and I hope this gives you a little bit of an insight into my situation. And at the same time, I'm again just a product of my environment. It feels like a universal basic income to me, honestly, and all I can say is that I wish it was like this for all students in all countries, because learning should be seen as something that people get paid for. And I really want to give back as much as I can because I am in this very lucky situation. Okay, yeah, I think that is it. Thank you so much for listening to all this, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye.